We sat in English class and we dissected the stories that I'd escaped into, laid open their abdomens and tagged their organs, covered their genitals with polite sterile drapes, recorded dutiful notes en masse that told us what the story was about, but never what the story was. Stories are propaganda, viri that slide past our critical immune system and insert themselves directly into your emotions, kill them and cut them open, and they're as naked as a nightclub in the daylight. Professor Jeff Rice starts off his book, The Rhetoric of Cool, with this gripping quote, and what he does throughout the book is similar to the dissection process he describes here. Rice slices into the history of rhetoric and exposes what he thinks are some of the critical missing organs. But before I dive into this too deeply, let me tell you a little bit about the author of this book, since that always informs the writing. Jeff Rice is an assistant professor of English at Wayne State University. Obviously, hits close to home for EMU students. Michigan being a very cool place to live, Rice decided to write a book about what he calls the rhetoric of cool. While the term cool isn't really defined clearly in the book, for the purpose of this review, here's a definition of the term to help you understand my analysis of the book. The rhetoric of cool refers to the melding of technology and composition that has taken place since 1963. According to Rice, it is absolutely necessary to see the history of composition through the lens of the rhetoric of cool, meaning that this combination of composition and technology should not be spliced apart, but instead seen as interwoven components of our culture's communication. Rice's argument about the need to rewrite history by looking through the lens of cool is made by looking back upon the work of previous critics and pointing out where they missed the critical component of technology in their discussion of rhetoric. For example, Rice states that Stephen North and those who have followed his thinking seemed to depend too much on the emancipated narrative. He goes on to explain that the emancipated narrative allows for the stabilization of English composition through the use of a grand narrative that does not really exist, and more importantly, does not encompass the changes to rhetoric in relationship to the changes in technology. Rice hopes to see things through a new frame. I ask, why hasn't composition studies refocused its narrative from the postmodern, the multiple narratives, the differing stories, the unrecognized moments, the idea of all things cool? Rice tries to fill in the gap that he has seen in previous stories of rhetoric by filling in with a new narrative. This book will define rhetorical practice conducive and generalizable to digital culture. According to Rice, something missing in the meta-narrative is the way in which technology offers a new component to audience awareness. Cool is about audience awareness in an age of technology. He explains that we depend too much on topoi, a term which Rice defines through the help of Aristotle. The topoi, Aristotle tells us, establishes common meanings and assumptions so that audience expectations can be anticipated and met with ease. When it comes to defining an audience, the topoi makes it difficult because it causes the problem of creating fixed places of argumentation. In Rice's opinion, the concept of chora should replace this. While topoi refers to the fixed places, chora is an open receptacle of meaning. Chora is better because it doesn't associate with a fixed, it's not associated with a fixed place or audience, and in the present age of communication and technology, this flexibility is essential. As with new flexibility, the concept of audience and place is essential in the era of writing. Rice also asserts that it is also necessary to see the text itself as a pliable form of communication. Text in this rhetoric of cool has the ability to work in a manner that is layered and not linear. The layering of processes, ideas, images, and text in one place complicates any given composition. Writing becomes a spatial act that is unique to past forms of literacy. Rice's concept regarding the nonlinearity of the rhetoric of cool is also present in his ideas about logic. The rhetoric of cool encompasses the idea that meaning is changeable and the philosophy that there are multiple meanings as opposed to a singular truth. Rice argues that technology changes things in that it allows for the possibility of swapping signifiers through sound, text, and image. This mobility of signifiers impacts the realities they represent. The final argument that Rice makes is that imagery is no longer a separate thing from composition. Instead, imagery is an essential aspect of the rhetoric of cool. It is an accepted trope regarding electronic writing that writers must learn to work with image. While this may be an accepted trope among some, Rice is concerned that all compositionists fully embrace the interconnectedness between imagery and the text. While Rice explains that changes that have taken place over time through the evolution of technology, he also makes the argument that due to these changes, the history of composition needs to be revamped, and there are issues with the clarity and organization of this book that make his argument weaker than it might be otherwise. As stated earlier, Rice does not define the term the rhetoric of cool explicitly in the first chapter, nor anywhere throughout the book. Instead, readers are left to piece together this information through his discussion and form their own conclusions about the foundational phrase that is used in the title and throughout the book. Additionally, the term cool is somewhat ironic. Asking any teenager or young adult on the street, the term cool is no longer apropos for describing something that is novel or exciting. In trying to engage with modernized forms of technology using the term cool, the author kind of dates himself and sounds somewhat silly. In connection with this criticism regarding the definition and the use of the term cool, the author fails to define several key terms throughout the book. Terms like kora or topoi are not only left undefined, but it seems assumed that readers will define and use these terms in the same way that the author does. The lack of clarity throughout the text leaves a lot to the reader's own assumptions and guesses as to what the author intends to communicate. In addition to this lack of clarity, the book does a poor job of carrying the initial argument throughout the text. Rice begins with a lengthy discussion regarding the need to rewrite history of composition to incorporate the use of technology. The first two chapters describe this assertion at some length, but the concept of rewriting is somewhat lost throughout the rest of the book. Subsequent chapters, instead of directly addressing this argument, tend to wander off into paths of alternative arguments regarding the implications of technology itself upon composition. While it may seem apparent here by this review that the two concepts connect, these connections are not made explicit for the reader as is done in this review. These subcomponents to Rice's argument of rewriting history would be more persuasive if tied back to the initial discussion about the history of rhetoric. Setting aside the argument of the need to rewrite composition history, in the rhetoric of cool, Rice draws to the surface an interesting discussion about the interconnectedness of technology and composition, and the changes in composition due to the changes in technology. Rice highlights how the evolution of technology has dramatically impacted composition or written rhetoric. While Rice's opinion regarding the impact of technology on rhetoric is fascinating, his ideas are also up for debate because they are firmly grounded in postmodern philosophy. Rhetoricians coming from alternative philosophical backgrounds may not agree with Rice's assertions, and it would be interesting to see Rice's arguments dissected and cut open until they too are as naked as a nightclub.